Hello there, listeners to the Bylines Network podcast. Welcome to the Streaming into the Void, so you don't have to show. I'm Julian in Bristol.
And I'm Chris in London.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the local elections, I just thought I'd go over one of my favourite quotes from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I want you all to keep this in mind as we go on. The regular early morning yell of horror was the sound of Arthur Dent waking up and suddenly remembering where he was. And quite honestly, if there has been any quote that has summed up my mood over the last couple of weeks, it's been that. Because the local elections happened last week, and my God, the results were chilling.
Yeah, I've never related to Arthur Dent's. Well, actually, from reading that book as a child, I found myself very much relating to Arthur Dent, but never so much have I related. It's
Oh,
Friday
so,
morning last week.
so some positives before we just dive right into the oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. Record-breaking numbers for the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats, the third and fourth biggest parties with the most councillors, after, Labour and the Conservatives, obviously. Yeah, that's about it.
Well, I mean, it wasn't I mean, we can say that Labour held on to three mayoralties.
Oh, yeah, oh God. Actually, if there was one mayoralty that basically summed up the entire night, it was the one that nobody pays any attention to at all, including the
Are you,
people that live there.
are you going
I
to
am,
say
of course, talking about the West England Combined Authority.
that? I knew it. I knew it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm surprised that it wasn't talked about more, purely because of who came second.
So, for all those who don't know, which is probably all of you listeners, because again, I'm the only person who cares about this, the West England Combined Authority is the authority that combines basically three counties: Bristol, Bath and North East Somerset, and South Gloucestershire. Basically replacing the County Avon experiment that for some reason they want to continue on because being part of like the same county for 30 years means that there is now a unified cultural identity. So because Bath and Bristol are generally, or they like to consider themselves generally, progressive cities, that often means that like a progressive can get in more often than not, except for that first time. The first time was a conservative. Then we had, oh God, Dan Norris, who I don't want to mention ever again. He won by like a landslide. This time we have first past the post, and it was the Labour option was a woman who worked for the controversial Mayor Marvin Rees. I interviewed her, lovely woman, had some good policies. Then there was Mary Page of the Greens, Ollie Henman of the Liberal Democrats, Steve Smith of the Conservatives. I don't know. He was never going to win. I didn't pay attention. An independent guy who wanted to be the Labour guy, but they didn't vote for him, so he left the party and decided to stand on his own. Good job there, mate. He came last. And Aaron Banks, the guy who basically funded the Leave campaign and the Brexit Party, who got into trouble in the courts because he gave donations that shouldn't have been given to the Brexit Party, and he was the Reform candidate for WECA. Now, all the bookies basically said this was a two-horse race between the Greens and Labour, because as I said, Bath and Bristol are basically the hubs of WECA. I don't think that's unfair to say. And we generally consider ourselves progressives. Like, you have to go back as far as 2003 to find a time when a progressive party wasn't ruling over Bristol. And Bath is like basically a Liberal Democrat safe haven, apart from that weird 4 year period between that ended in 2017. Basically, Labour slash Greens, Lib Dems, and then you have South Gloucestershire, which is basically conservative bedrock. Suburbs, middle class people, people who commute into Bristol. So everyone was saying it was a two-horse race between the Greens and Labour. And oh my God. Oh, Aaron Banks came second. Aaron Banks came second. What happened?
Well, I mean, it turned out to be more or less a three-horse race, considering there's 10,000 votes between Mary Page of the Greens and Helen
Yeah.
Godwin of won.
And the
And you,
reason why I say that this election basically sums up what I'm assuming is just going to be the future of British politics for the foreseeable future is because the points difference between Helen Godwin, who came first, and who came last was 11%. Like, we just about avoided an Aaron Banks mayoralty.
one of the key takeaways is demonstrated by this result in the West of England mayoralty. I think the fracturing of the two-party system that we have in this country, the result in WECA is literally like, oh, it's not how it used to be. Things are changing. You had Labour obviously win it, and like you say, there was 11% between Aaron Banks and of Reform and Helen Godwin of Labour. But you had the Greens, who would, I think they were sort of 4,000-ish votes behind Reform. So you've got this, 20%, 20%, 20% odd. And it was a whisker. It is a whisker that Aaron Banks ended up losing by.
6,000 votes between Godwin and Banks, and 4,000 between Page and Banks. And he was just so goddamn annoying about it because he kept saying, "Oh, Bristol for Banksy," and it's like, I wish I could swear. I wish I could swear so much because this would just be a bunch of expletives.
I am quite surprised at how well he did, but I'm also not when you think about the demographic and the makeup of that mayoralty.
So each of three different people won the three different regions. So Godwin won Bristol. It was a two-horse race between Page and Godwin, by the way, in Bristol, which is not too surprising. Ollie Henman got most of his 28,000 votes from Bath, which is not too surprising, because as I said, Bath and North East Somerset is Lib Dem run council. They've had a Lib Dem MP since 2017. And Aaron Banks got most of his from South Gloucestershire, which, as I said, is Tory bedrock. And unsurprisingly, a lot of people didn't vote for the Tories. But then you had to take into account all the people who A would have voted Conservative in the other areas, and B disaffected voters of both the Conservatives and Labour, which, by the way, there are a lot of those in Bristol because not only are we dissatisfied with Mr. Starmer, we are very dissatisfied with Mr. Rees, the former Labour mayor, whose entire thing was, "Oh, I need to create a legacy. Quick, let's make a London Eye, but in Bristol."
And am I right in saying this is the first time that first past the post has been used?
This is first past the post, yeah. And as I said in Election Fever last year, the way to win with first past the post is by getting 33% of the votes across different regions. And that's basically why Mr. Banks did so well, because he got a lot of support across the different regions. He got most of the support from one and then did enough in the other two. But thankfully, it was the same for Miss Godwin as well. So we have 4 more years of Labour. That's the one election that I think pretty much sums up the night. Reform took a lot of votes away from the Conservatives and picked up a few disaffected left-leaning voters, and so just decided, oh yeah, no, don't worry, we'll vote for the right-wing party, and hopefully that'll just show that we want Labour to step up this, please. And unsurprisingly, voting for the right-wing party has only made the sort of right-wing party more right-wing.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's evidence of that today with the border security, asylum, and immigration bill, which we will be talking about in an episode at some point in the future. You have to think. I'm a cynic at heart. I hate to say it, shock horror, but a week or so after the local elections, and the Labour government is bringing in a bill where they are a lot more hardline on migration.
Not just that, they've also supposedly shelved plans to ban gay conversion therapy and trans conversion therapy because, and I am quoting the Guardian article here, it would be like catnip for Mr. Farage. Backward sliding on gay rights and trans rights and being more hardline on immigration by getting rid of care workers who we absolutely need in this country because we don't have enough of them by ourselves, all because reform won a lot of seats. So, like, what? And if you did vote for reform because you're dissatisfied with Labour, what were you expecting? What were you genuinely expecting? Were you expecting them to take a look at this, and go, "Oh, maybe we need to like push this vote for change a little bit faster"? Because I saw a YouGov poll after the local elections that said, "Why didn't you vote for Labour this time?" And they said, "Not quick enough. Things feel the same, and we feel like it's getting worse."
That
So
reflects such a deep rooted unsatisfaction with the Tories that is still hung over from 2024, July 2024. Like that, there is that. I don't necessarily think that's frustration with that. That's them going, well, I like everything Nigel Farage has to say.
it's not. It's them going, "We want change faster, please." But rather than Labour go, "Oh, they obviously want change faster. I guess we need to like push some of these things forward." They're going, "Oh, they want us to be more racist."
Yeah, but I mean, and I'm not, no, the change narrative, literally, that word, I think, has been worn out so much by the government. Change, change, change. All we have heard, plan for change, change, change. During the election, you're like, when the general election happened, we talked about this at the time. That's
Hmm.
a powerful word. People thought we had 14 years of Tories, 14 years of Conservative government, and change was the word of the day. That's still being run now on grids from Downing Street, quite obviously. And the problem is you cannot say change and people still feel the same, which they do, but they feel worse because of things like the winter fuel cut and welfare reforms. And then when you tie in the collapse of the Tories and the sort of rise that we've seen of reform and the narrative and the attention they've got, focusing things on things like migration, on the grooming gangs, people start to go, well, actually, Labour aren't too different. And that's what was heard on the doorstep. It was, what have you actually changed? So far, you've cut winter fuel allowance for pensioners. I'm not going to get into the minutiae of that argument because I don't entirely think that was a terrible means testing the winter fuel allowance. I don't necessarily think it was a terrible idea. I think the communication could have been far better. Absolutely. But
You heard it here, folks. You heard it here first, quote, folks. Christopher Davis supports pensioners freezing in basements.
no, I don't. I don't. Means testing of that, I don't agree with the way it was done. And I mean, in an ideal world, we wouldn't do that. But I think there are lots of people who get it who don't actually need it. There are. It's just that's just fact. I'm not, and I'm not going to sit on this podcast and justify that decision because there've been a myriad of poor decisions which I have documented my dissatisfaction with at length. But right now, in the public's political minds, there is such a ripe, like, readiness for something different, and the government haven't delivered that yet. So of course they're going to go for reform because that's what they see in the media as the third option. It's they're the ones that are becoming popular. They're the ones that are polling well. Every poll that comes out, there's news flash, all reformer second in the polls or whatever. As much as that is a poll, and you can take or leave polls and interpret them how you want to, that people reading that and Nigel Farage getting a bigger platform, it just builds the momentum. And we might never see the Tories return to where they were again. Let's not forget these seats that were contested this time were last contested in 2021.
2021. So it was post-vaccine bounce.
Yes. So like the Boris vaccine bounce. So that haul of seats in 2021 was a massive high for the Tories. And obviously that's a high place to come down from. But it was bad. It was really bad.
Oh yes, like Reform got what 677 seats last I checked, and then you just look at the Tories next to them. It goes minus 676.
Yeah. So the Conservatives lost control of 16 councils. Reform gained control of 10. And they also, sorry, we've totally skipped over. They won the by-election in Runcorn and Helsby by just 6 votes.
Yeah, and I'm honestly, I think Labour kind of gave up on that just by the fact that they didn't have any significant figures at like the polling station. Do you know where Nigel Farage was that night? He was at the polling station to celebrate the victory. I could have gotten those 6 votes. Six votes. That's what their apathy cost. It cost them 6 votes.
Keir Starmer rocked up in Hartlepool and campaigned up there when the by-election happened in 2024. This time, he didn't go up once, I
No,
don't think. And you can argue, yes, you're Prime Minister, you're very busy, but as leader of the
send
opposition...
Angela Rayner. God knows she's not doing anything. Send Darren Jones. You seem to put him on Question Time all the time. So why not just send him out there going, yes, I know Labour are quite slow, but we have to stick with the plan, don't we? Which honestly just seems to be his one line now. Just, we have to stick with the plan. You have to stick with the plan.
And all the plan so far has resulted in, reform obviously performing the best that they ever have, but that's kind of the first set of local elections they've ever had a chance in.
And by the way, congratulations to Reform UK on being the 5th largest mainstream party with the most councillors.
So Andrea Jenkins, she's a delightful woman within.
Isn't she the one who held up a middle finger at protesters outside Number 10?
She did when in the dying days of the Johnson government. She did put her middle finger up at people outside Number 10. What she also did in the interviews the day after her election was to call for asylum seekers to be housed in tents instead of buildings. And even that was too far for the deputy leader from Richard Tice, who then proceeded to sort of disavow those comments. But she is now the mayor of Greater Lincolnshire. You have the new Reform Mayor Luke Campbell for Hull and East Yorkshire, who is a former Olympic boxer. And one of the first things he did in his mayoralty area was to ban any flags that weren't the Union Jack
and the St George's Cross, which then led to everybody going, "Wait, that means we can't fly the Yorkshire Rose."
Yes,
a significant symbol for the county,
and other flags like we just had VE Day, so there are flags which they represent.
Oh yeah, the American, the French, the Russians, British Empire forces, if there's a single flag for that, but all the various flags of all the various people who fought on D-Day. So
even just commemorative flags, so that he banned those. I'm sure Hull and East Yorkshire are so grateful. That was one of the first things he did with the power that he had. And I mean, the problem is now, and having Sky News on in the background while I was working, they interviewed Nigel Farage, I think, last night or today. Their political correspondent went, well, people see him as a contender for Prime Minister in 4 years' time. So we have to scrutinise him in the same way, which obviously means he's going to be on the television more, the radio more, on Question Time more. And, that's democracy. But at the same time, it exposes more of what they stand for. And, the Conservative vote's got to go somewhere, but so does the Labour vote, people who are very unhappy. And let's not forget, when we talked about the election in July, the general election results, one of the things we talked about was how fragile that majority is. Because so many MPs have seats with majorities that are not that big. And they are in areas where, in this local election that happened a week and a bit ago, councillors were gained by reform. So there are lots of Labour MPs, I can guarantee you, that are probably crapping themselves at what's just happened. And the government needs to get its act together.
Right, on to slightly less important news. I don't know how to class it. One of those major parties which could greatly benefit from dissatisfied left-leaning voters is changing their leaders, maybe. The Green Party is going up for leadership change. leadership elections. So I'm going to talk about it, and Chris is going to take the mick out of me for being a Green member.
No, I mean the first thing that I thought was really interesting was that they re-elect their leader every 3 years,
Every
regard
2 years.
sorry, every 2 years, regardless of situation. So I mean, one of the first things that I would say as a Labour member is what happens if you're in government and you have to do that? It's a little bit of a
Well,
mess. That's my first one. That's my first one. Obviously, at the moment, it's not a thing to worry about, but it's an interesting.
it's an interesting system to be sure. I mean, so these elections are kind of overdue because the last ones were in 2021. But because we were anticipating, well, because the Green Party was anticipating an election in 2024, as was literally anyone with two brain cells to rub together, they decided that, hey, maybe changing our political leader like a year before an election might not be all that favorable to us. And I can genuinely see the headlines now like what if Carla Denyer and Adrian Ramsey did change like a year before the election, and in the election they just kept dogging them, just going, so don't you think it's politically unstable for that to happen and all that jargon? So yeah, they decided to keep Adrian Ramsey and Carla Denyer on for an extra year and then have the elections now. Right now, there are two main candidates slash multiple candidates in one So the Green Party doesn't necessarily have to have co-leaders. It's just quite often that happens. Caroline Lucas serves both as a solo leader and as a co-leader in two different instances. So right now, the significant news is that Carla Denyer, who I would argue is the face of the Green Party right now, has stood down as Green Party co-leader to focus on her commitments as an MP. And in her stead, Adrian Ramsey has decided to continue on, but replacing her as co-leader, potential co-leader, is fellow Green MP Ellie Chowns, who has one of the Herefordshire and Worcestershire seats. Well, they're going to co-lead if people vote for them. If you've been around any of the new media places, so like YouTube or any left-leaning podcasts, you'd think that another person would be in the lead because they all love him. It's Zack Polanski. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, listeners. I'm kind of torn because on the one hand, I do agree with some of the things that he's saying. I do believe that the Green Party is a little bit too polite. I do believe they're a little bit too quiet, and they do need to be banging the drum a little bit more. And honestly, I think that left-leaning parties need to embrace populism a little bit more. You know,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
embrace like a charismatic leader who's a good communicator, who knows how to, if I may be cringe for a second, get down with the kids. For all the things that you can criticize Jeremy Corbyn about, and believe me, I have so many things I can criticize Jeremy Corbyn about. He he embraced new media. Part of the reason why he was so popular amongst the young was because he was posting TikToks and going onto podcasts and YouTube channels that were a hit with young people. I remember like a summation of the Kamala Harris campaign being she ran a very good, very great campaign for 2004. Donald Trump did all the things that Jeremy Corbyn did. He went onto the Joe Rogan podcast for 3 hours. He talked to various YouTubers, all that kind of thing. So in a way, I kind of agree with Zach Polanski. We do need to be banging the drum of populism a little bit more. And then he said we need to leave NATO, which I'm kind of against, if I'm being perfectly frank.
I mean, the question I have is, and this is potentially coming from a place where I've been involved in Labour Party since I was, for more than 10 years now. I can't envision where we have a system where we elect MPs to Parliament, and that's where I'm not saying local politics and the London Assembly isn't important, but to have a prospect, the way that our electoral system works, the leader of a party, if they have a majority, becomes prime minister, right? So, and I'm not saying, but it's unlikely that the Greens will win a majority and form a government in my lifetime anyway. Um, But even if they end up being as big as the Lib Dems, for example, do you not need a leader to be in Westminster? Now you can make the argument the SNP, of course, don't, because their leader is First Minister of Scotland.
SNP, Plaid Cymru, literally any of the local parties for the big parties in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. The Green Party for the longest time. Caroline Lucas was not the leader for all her years in Parliament. She was only leader for like 10 years.
Most people, she was the de facto leader of the Green Party.
She was the face of the Green Party. That didn't mean that she was the leader of the Green Party. And you're forgetting Zack Polanski is an elected official. He's the deputy leader on the London Assembly. So he but yes, I do completely agree with you. I think it would be all nice and neat if we did actually have an elected leader in Westminster. That being said, though, Carla Denyer is still going to be the face of the party because she's been the most vocal, every time Zack Polanski's been busy.
Well, as a Green Party member, I guess you have to look at what they actually are saying.
I know, Carla Denyer stood down and now I have to use my brain.
I mean, but the direction for both of them is the direction for, well, there could be another candidate who announces or candidates, who knows? There's still time. I think what the nomination shut in June or something. So it could
Yeah.
still, you could still have some people. But I mean, from what I've been reading, their approaches are very different. So like Adrian Ramsey and Ellie Chowns, their ticket and their selling points they're giving to people are, you know, we need to focus on being elected and being pragmatic and getting votes in a general election and building a ground sort of force to do that. But they're not being like, we need to be loud, we need to be saying the difficult things and like making noise. In the same way Zach Polanski sort of like, people are calling it eco-populism, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like, he's the activist candidate in this, it seems, and they're the elected.
It's basically just going to be going back to the early days of what do we want? Do we want an activist leader who pretty much embodies like the ideals the Green Party stands for? Again, stepping out of NATO notwithstanding, because fun fact, we got rid of that when Ukraine happened. Or do we want to go with a leader who has, or one of the leaders who has shown arguably the greatest success the Green Party has seen in recent times? Like Adrian Ramsey, while he might not have been on the telly as much, co-led with Carla Denyer to 4 Green elected MPs, including himself and Ellie Chowns.
Let's not forget the majorities that Ellie Chowns and Adrian Ramsey overturned were not in significant majorities either.
No, they weren't.
I think Ellie Chowns' majority she overturned was 25,000. That's insane.
In rural areas as well. And that might actually be something that might be advantageous because the reputation of the Green Party is, they're popular in urban areas like Brighton and London and Bristol. So I don't know whether or not electing a guy on the London Assembly would be any way to dispel that. Whereas having 2 co-leaders from rural areas where they overturned massive Tory majorities would be a way to get rid of that.
For me, the way that you're talking about this sort of this conundrum that you have to decide on, obviously, when you cast your vote, it's almost like when Owen Smith challenged Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership, God knows how many years ago, and then you had people going, well, do we go for
the one that will win votes, or do we go for the one that's idealist?
Mm.
Again, I do agree with Zach Polanski to a certain degree. I do believe that we need to beat the drum a little bit more to win over disaffected left-leaning Labour voters, because God knows there's a lot of them, and start fighting Nigel Farage on his own terms in terms of like embracing populism. On the other hand, you've got one guy who's led the Green Party to its biggest electoral success, and a person who has benefited from that electoral success and I have looked this up, in very strong conservative areas where they had a over 30% swing just to get their votes. That's not nothing.
No, and I mean the thing that, and obviously they're polar opposites in terms of their political opinions, but in terms of their representation in Parliament, Reform and the Greens have more or less the same amount of MPs. Like the numbers are not that different, but it feels like Reform use that so much better than the Greens do at the moment. But you've got 4 MPs now, more than you've ever had. Use it. Like, why are we not hearing from you? Why are the Greens not on the pages of newspapers with op-eds? Why are they not on, Sunday political shows? Why, like, what is going on? It doesn't feel like they're utilizing the capital they gained in July last year as much as they should be. Yeah,
No, I completely agree, and that's one of the things that Zack Polanski. That's one of the things that he's talking about. Like, because we're being very polite about it. We're keeping our heads down when we're getting on with business. Carla Denyer is on a committee that's looking into renters. So they're not doing nothing, but we don't know that because they're not on question time all the time. They're not. Zack Polanski being interviewed by the Byline Times was literally the first time I've ever seen something like this.
No, but that's what I mean. Like all of that stuff, and the thing is, Westminster is fine, but if now the Greens have got a foothold in it with their 4 MPs, they're going, wow, we can sit on committees and we can, that does do stuff, that does create change, that does influence legislation. That is not what people in their homes who don't pay attention to how Westminster works, how legislation is formed, they don't know that. They don't care. Like they don't care that I sat on report stage for this bill. Like you can sit on a report stage for a bill or committee stage even and have some massive influence over what amendments are in, what amendments are out, what changes are made. That's important. But people don't care about that. They care
Mm-hmm.
about what they hear from you, what they can understand without having to go, right, what does this mean? What does report stage? What is committee stage? I feel like it's really horrible to say, but it feels like the Green Party is sort of, but like it feels like they're like the nerdy group. They're sort of like, we're going to put our heads down and do the books and study the books and swat up for exams and da 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 da. Reform are the bully. They're like the popular kid. They're loud, and because they're loud, people listen to them. They could be doing so much more in
I
getting their
complete,
message.
I no, I completely agree. The problem is, I don't live in the Carla Denyer's constituency, so I can't like message her just going, "Hey, what's going on, please?" Like I agree, we should be doing better. We should be using this momentum that we've gotten, but it does kind of feel like we've been doing a victory lap for the last year. Carla Denyer's been fabulous every time she's appeared, but she's no longer in a leadership position, so we can't rely on her natural charisma.
No, but I also can't lie. Like I would be lying if I said when I have like the live stream of the chamber on, which I do often for work, and I'm listening to what's being said, and when there are statements, there are questions, there are always Green MPs in there standing up and asking questions. Obviously, they have to because there's 4 of them. They have to be. They've probably got an Excel spreadsheet rotoring them for God knows which question on which day. I mean, but
It's very small.
yeah, but like, and that's fine. Like the chamber is important. Stick up and stand up and ask the questions. But that is not where the sound bites are made. That is not where the people at home hear you.
You know how to say they should be embracing new media? The Greens are like the perfect party that should be showing that, but they're not. They have a presence on Blue Sky. They have a presence on Blue Sky. They have a presence on Twitter and all that, but that's basically it. Like they're not. That's the most frustrating thing about politics. They're learning the wrong things from the successful right-wing politicians, and I use politicians in the loosest sense of the word.
As a party with 4 MPs, you can be the responsible ones and go, well, we're not going to go out and be screaming and shouting and promising things we can't deliver. And that's fine. You should never promise things you can't deliver. But you have the space to you have that space. You can criticize and suggest things in ways you couldn't do if you were one in government or two, the second biggest party in opposition. You should be using that space to formulate these ideas, communicate your message, as exaggerated as it can possibly be, in ways that people can understand, and it's just not happening. I don't understand why. Because with the way that the government's in a very difficult position at the moment, especially on stuff to do with climate change, that if they were wanting to be loud about they've sort of been ahead of the curve on, they should be screaming and shouting from the rooftops about some of the recent announcements on net zero and climate change. But they're not. They're not on the Today program. They're not on Question Time. They're not on like Sunday Politics or those shows. I don't
I
know. It's
can't
just,
I can't really give you an answer that doesn't come off as like a whiny shell going, the media won't give us any
but
attention.
that could be it. That could be it. We don't know. That
I
could well
mean,
be
yeah,
it.
I mean, yeah, that could be it, but they've also been saying that for the last 25 years. At some point, it just becomes a you problem.
And if
Like
that is,
we should be making more of a noise of it. We should be saying, "Hey, we're actually one of the biggest parties in the country right now. We've got the fifth most councillors. We've got the fifth most MPs in Parliament. Like we've got over 60,000 members. You should be." They should be grabbing the media by the scruff of the neck, going, "You will pay attention to us, please."
yeah,
And
and if it
oh
is,
god, you're now just convincing me to vote for Zack Polanski, which means they're gonna
Zach, if you're a listener, there you go.
Zach, if you're listening, it's not that I don't like you, it's just that there are some things that I disagree with.
No, but it's a really good point. Like even if it is the media saying, oh, we don't have space for you or whatever, like you can make the argument. We'll go, well, you have X from Reform on all the time,
Yeah.
like, and then make a big song and dance about it. Like do a public statement and say, well, the BBC didn't let us on because they said they didn't have space, but they do it for parties who have the same amount of MPs as us. Like make that there's no vocalness. There's no like say it, say it with your chest. Be loud, and yeah, it's strange.
I've been saying for the longest time that when it comes to politics, you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. But quite frankly, I'm kind of drawn between the two of them. Just like I agree with Zach Polanski, we need to be embracing populism a little bit more. We need to be banging the drum. We need to be making much more of a big deal that we are one of the biggest parties in the UK right now. But at the same time, you don't win elections by being extremist. We've seen that with Jeremy Corbyn. We've seen that with the Conservatives at the most recent general election. The further and further away from the centre you go, particularly the first past the post, the more votes you lose. And arguably, one of the reasons why we've been so successful is because they've kind of gone further and further towards the centre. So I don't know. I'm genuinely torn. I would go for like the ideal candidate for me would be someone who's somewhere in the middle, embracing populism a bit more, but still being like trying to appeal to both your core base, but also to new voters, because we have seen particularly in two seats that they can appeal to new voters in great swaths. So I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about it. Like I renewed my membership the other day just so I can vote, but now Carla Denyer's pulled out. I'm just kind of like, oh God, what do
Well,
I do now?
that seems to be the conclusion. It's for you. It's a shame that Carla Denyer's not running.
I like her. Like she was very great. She very graciously agreed to be interviewed by me. So I'm definitely going to be biased towards her a little bit. Ever since I first interviewed her, she has said nothing but everything that she said I have agreed with. But unfortunately, I can't let the perfect be the enemy of good. I'm going to have to
Yep.
put my money where my mouth is and just go for the one that's closest to me and hope and find the rest of the way myself.
And hey, you'll have another leadership election in 2 years' time, so it's not that long.
So that's been our episode, listeners. Sorry, it's been a bit of a downer. I hope you enjoyed Chris taking the absolute mick out of me for being a Green Party member. But don't worry, I'm almost certain they'll be taking the mick out of him for being a Labour Party member in the next episode. I've been Julian from Bristol.
And I've been Chris in London.